Hello there and welcome to another video from me, the History Tutor, and this time we're looking at the First World War topic for AQA, Conflict and Tension, 1894 to 1918, and we're going to be looking at the other fronts of the First World War. So away from the West, we're going to look at the Eastern Front, the Southern Front, the war at sea, the war in the air, Gallipoli. We're going to find out about the other things going on in the war. Firstly, let's find out about the war at sea. So there were some significant battles, particularly early on in the war, we need to think about. So the early battles started almost straight away in August 1914, the Battle of Heligoland Bight. British led a surprise attack on German ships, and they destroyed 4 German ships in this battle. In November 1914, the British declared that the North Sea was a war zone, and they began blockading ships to stop supplies getting to Germany. So this is the important blockade of Germany to try and starve Germany out of the war. It's obviously very significant. December 1914, German battleships bombarded the British coast towns of Scarborough, Whitby and Hartlepool, killing over 100 people. So now British Navy had to protect Britain. There was an outcry, where was the British Navy? Why was it not protecting the British people? By January 1915, the British tried to get their revenge on the German attacks at the Battle of Dogger Bank. The German Navy had attempted another raid on coastal towns. However, the British had broken their secret codes by this stage. The British led a surprise attack and destroyed 1 German cruiser and killed over 900 German sailors. So now there was revenge for the British, and they had a big victory for public opinion in Britain. So the big naval battle was the Battle of Jutland, and here are some of the key things to know about it. The German Admiral von Schlieffen wanted a more aggressive strategy to break the British naval blockade. Germany was starting to starve by this time, and they needed desperately to try and get more supplies through to Germany. So he planned a trap. The British knew the plan because they'd broken the German codes, of course. So at the battle, the British fleet surprised the Germans, and the Germans fled eventually from the battle scene. So during the battle, the British lost 9 ships and twice as many sailors as the Germans. However, the Germans had the most significant battleships destroyed, and after Jutland, the German fleet did not attempt another battle against the British again during the war. So Britain had a moral victory. They had shown they dominated the sea, and their naval blockade could continue successfully and starve the Germans out. And obviously it was a very significant reason why British and the Allies won the war. So the Germans turned to a U-boat campaign as time went on to try and get their own blockade going. This in particular was a blockade of supplies to Britain, of course. So in February 1915, Germany announced its unrestricted U-boat campaign to sink all ships supplying Britain. Germany only had 21 U-boats at the time, and they only managed to destroy about 4% of shipping arriving in Britain, so it wasn't very impactful at this stage. Of course, the most significant and famous thing about the first U-boat campaign was the sinking of the US ship, the Lusitania. This meant the Germans had to stop their unrestricted campaign as the USA threatened to get involved in the war if the Germans continued sinking ships. However, after the failure of the Navy, the Germans had to turn to their U-boat campaign again in 1917. By February 1917, the British naval blockade was starving Germany out, and they suffered a terrible winter known as the Turnip Winter of 1916. So a new unrestricted U-boat campaign was announced, and this led to the USA declaring war on Germany, alongside things like the Zinman telegram as well, of course. Germany now had 200 U-boats built and destroyed 500 ships in the first 8 weeks. Britain was now being starved. They had a successful blockade now, the Germans, against Britain. The government announced in Britain they only had 6 weeks of food left. Okay, so a crisis began in Britain. So the British started to protect their supply fleets. So they organised protection by having convoys of battleships protecting their supply ships. Also, they had depth charges. These were charges that you could drop from a battleship and they would explode underwater and potentially damage submarines. They had Q-boats. These were battleships disguised as merchant ships. And they had long-range aircraft to spot submarines before they went underwater. This meant only 1% of ships were destroyed, and Germany was having a shortage of U-boats as many of them were getting destroyed. So now the crisis of supplies was over, and the blockade was not successful against Britain, and yet the British blockade, of course, remained successful against Germany. It's all about war in the air. So how did airplanes help at the front line? Airplane technology was still pretty basic in 1914, but they were useful for aerial reconnaissance, taking pictures of the enemy. A significant example of this was the Battle of the Marne, where it was spotted there were gaps between the two German armies, and the British army pushed into this gap to try and encircle the enemy, leading to the German retreat at the Battle of the Marne. Planes soon started to attack one another in the air to stop the aerial reconnaissance. At first they used pistols, simply shooting each other, or throwing sort of dart-style instruments to try and destroy the wings. But plane technology soon developed. The Fokker company developed a machine gun that could fire through the propeller, so now you could have more effective dogfighting in the air. What about bomber planes and air raids? At first, pilots would drop grenades or bombs simply from their plane to try and destroy things below. But by 1917, the Germans had developed the Gotha bomber. This could fly longer and carry more bombs. By June 1917, a raid of 20 bomber planes bombed London, killing over 150 people. Of course, Britain had to react, so they had the Handley Page bomber, which bombed Germany with over 200 bombing raids, killing multiple people. One of the famous sights of the First World War, of course, was airships. The large German Zeppelin airships bombed France, Belgium and Britain. In 1915, there were over 20 raids of Britain, killing 188 people. The airships didn't survive very long, though, of course. Planes were more manoeuvrable and better as the war went on. Also, airships were quite easy to shoot down. Maybe even with a pistol, you could puncture the airship. Generally, though, planes had developed during the war and become more and more successful. In particular, by 1918, planes could drop ammunition, they could support the battles of the 100 Days' War, and really were becoming a useful and significant part of the war effort. Okay, so what about the Gallipoli campaign then? And what were the aims of it? Well, firstly, in October 1914, Turkey had joined the war and they began to block supply routes to Russia as they controlled the Dardanelles Straits. Now, this was important because Russia was reliant on frozen, cold ports in the north if they couldn't get supply lines through the Mediterranean, through the Dardanelles Straits to the southern areas of Russia. So Winston Churchill, who was Lord of the Admiralty, led a campaign to attack Turkey and to open up these straits to allow supplies to get through to Russia. So the purpose was to divert German and Austrian soldiers away from the Eastern Front fighting Russia and bring them down south to help the Turks, while also opening up the supply routes to Russia in the south. Okay, so what happened? So in March 1915, naval bombardments began to destroy the forts of the Dardanelles, and 3 ships were sank due to mines. So the Navy withdrew from the area. So now it became important, if they're going to take the Dardanelles and control the straits through this area, they needed a land campaign. The Navy, unfortunately, had failed. So in April 1915, General Hamilton led a land invasion to destroy the forts that protected the Dardanelles Straits. But many of the beaches had steep cliffs, and the Turkish were ready with machine guns to fight off the invading soldiers. So Anzac, which is Australian, New Zealand and Canadian troops, attacked at Anzac Cove, as it's now known. Thousands were killed on the beaches as they tried to land there to get the forts. Later, the French failed to land at Kumkale, but the British and Anzacs landed at Silver Bay and Cape Helles. So fronts have now been formed to try and attack these forts. So what was it like fighting in the trenches here? So supply lines were difficult as the Allies only had a small beach to land supplies, and obviously some of their boats through the Mediterranean could be attacked relatively easily or bombarded by Turkish guns on the mainland. They lacked clean water, leading to 80% of Anzac soldiers having dysentery at one stage and water-related illnesses. The summer was very hot, with temperatures rising up to about 40 degrees, and of course a lack of water as well combined made the conditions very tough. By November, December, conditions were then freezing as they get late into 1915, and soldiers began to suffer with frostbite and die due to the cold. So it was decided to lead an evacuation. By October, news of the disaster had reached the British media and General Hamilton was sacked. So General Munro organised a retreat between the 10th of December 1915 and the 9th of January 1916. The Allies withdrew successfully with only 3 recorded deaths during the withdrawal from the Turkish coast. To trick the Turkish, and the British set up guns to fire automatically. So the Turkish did not know they were retreating but still thought they were firing at the enemy. So what was the results of the Gallipoli campaign if we're going to evaluate it in an answer? Well, it obviously failed to knock Turkey out of the war. And in fact, it was made worse because Bulgaria joined with Turkey to fight against Greece and Serbia to claim land in that region. So the situation had been made worse. The Central Powers had got stronger and the Allies had more people to fight against them. The Dardanelles were still controlled by the Turkish. There was no easy supply route through to Russia. So they were going to be reliant on the cold ports in the north of Russia. There were over 200,000 casualties of which 100,000 were due to illnesses on the Allied side. And obviously the Anzac soldiers bore the brunt of most of that. And around 48,000 Allied soldiers were killed. Okay, you can interpret some successes if you wish. So obviously the Germans and Austrians were distracted and were forced to help Turkey, which gave the Russians in the east a little bit of a break. Some supply ships did get through to Russia, but there was no permanent supply line. And the Turkish also suffered 300,000 casualties, so they were severely weakened from the war. They were not necessarily a great power, so for them this was quite a big loss, and they were less significant in the war. So what about some of the wider fronts? Well, let's consider firstly the Eastern Front then. This is probably the most significant other front away from the Western Front itself. So obviously the Russians were fighting the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans on this front. The Russians started quite quickly and invaded into Germany, but were then swiftly defeated in two massive defeats at the Battle of Tannenberg and the Battle of Masurian Lakes. Further south, the Austro-Hungarians invaded with their Plan R and stormed their way into Russian territory. However, once a large army of Russians, around 500,000 soldiers, appeared, the Austro-Hungarians quickly fled back into their own territory, and trenches and defences were formed between the two sides. In 1916, the Russians led their most famous battle, the Brusilov Offensive, and this attack on multiple locations severely weakened the Austro-Hungarians and almost knocked them out of the war. Only German reinforcements saved them, and they pushed Russia back until early 1917, where Russia was in chaos. Obviously, have a look at the video on the Russian Revolution and Russia leaving the war to find out more about that one. Then we have the Southern Front. This is the Italians attacking Austro-Hungarians. Now, this was in 1915. Obviously, as we talked about in the alliance video, the Italians were uneasy with an alliance with the Austrians because what they wanted was Austrian land where the Italians lived. There were 7 major battles between 1915 and 1917 between the Italians and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and only around about 10 miles of land exchanged between the two sides, fighting in the Alps and quite challenging territory. However, in November 1917, the Germans led a huge attack against the Italians at the Battle of Caporetto, and the Italians fled in disarray and were almost knocked out of the war. They then reorganised themselves, and in October to November 1918, they attacked the Austro-Hungarians and defeated them at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, and the Austro-Hungarians were knocked out of the war. We have another sort of southern front, maybe towards the Balkans. We might call it the Salonika Front, thinking about Greece and the Balkans. So here the Bulgarians joined the war in October 1915. Supported by Austro-Hungary and Germany, they attacked Serbia and tried to knock them out of the war. The British, French and Russians landed soldiers in Greece and in Serbia to protect them, and this propped up the front. Away from Europe, there were also other battle fronts. So we have the Arabian Front. Here obviously is where Turkey joined in the war. So the British and Indian troops attacked the Turkish in Arabia. In 1916, Anzac soldiers also joined them with British and Indians to help push back the Turks with victories at Beersheba and Megiddo. Also, local Arab forces were attacking the Turkish for independence against their Turkish Ottoman overlords. This is where we get the story of T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, helping to organise the local Arab forces to attack the Turkish with hit-and-run tactics. We also have war in Africa between the colonies. So Germany had a number of colonies in Africa, so wars developed between the British and French against the German colonies. So Togoland was attacked and taken over by the British and French quite early on in the war. German Cameroon was attacked at the start of the war and eventually conquered by February 1916. South African forces from the British Empire conquered German Southwest Africa. And German East Africa was held by a 12,000 strong army against a huge British Empire army of up to 200,000 people. Then we do have some war in the Pacific as well. Anzac forces attacked German forces in Samoa and New Guinea in the first weeks of the war and took over those lands. Japan had an alliance with Britain. They were involved in the war supporting Britain. They attacked the German fleet in the Pacific. They took over the German lands like the Marshall Islands, and they generally protected trade routes in the east for the Allies. Okay, well, I hope you found this talk through video useful. Well, have a look at it a few times and revise your knowledge so you've got some good ideas about the different fronts that are taking place, particularly the war at sea and Gallipoli often are questions that come up. Think about what happened and their impacts. And then, of course, if you want to test yourself, then have a look at my videos about how to answer exam questions, tutoring you through to top answers for all your exam skills. And if you find those useful, and of course, have a look at my revision guides. You can find links in this video to find out more about my revision guides on my Amazon page. And hopefully if you found this video useful, you'll subscribe and look at more of my videos as well. Well, hope to see you again soon. Bye bye for now.